Welcome. My name is David Forbes. It's my great pleasure to
3 seconds.
welcome Professor Raphael to the conference. Her work obviously is very familiar to you all, and in fact she needs no introduction, but I shall give her an introduction anyway. Professor Raphael is Emeritus Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Queensland, Professor of Psychological Medicine at ANU, and Professor of Population, Mental Health and Disasters at the University of Western Sydney. She's had extensive experience in disaster mental health in Australia and internationally. She's been involved in research, policy development in children's mental health, including promotion, prevention, early intervention, as well as mental health research and policy more broadly. She was the Foundation President of ASTSS and recognised with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the International Society for Traumatic Stress, and Chair of the Australian Child and Adolescent Trauma Loss and Grief Network. So please welcome Professor Raphael.
It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here this afternoon, and I feel like a proud grandmother, because I'm already that, about the society and how far it's come, and especially I think the great work that's going on, the cohorts of young people, the cohorts of diversity that bring such great experience to this. But before I start for me, I would also like to do what was done this morning, acknowledge the original owners of this land and all of our lands, because my greatest learning was the time that I went back to Australia with Pat Swan Delaney to learn about Aboriginal mental health, social and emotional wellbeing, and to learn that the original owners of this land, the original inhabitants of this land for probably 70,000 or maybe longer years, are the people who are the most resilient culture in society, but nevertheless experienced the most extreme trauma, loss and grief. And I thought I was an expert until I had that experience. So I paid tribute to the Aboriginal people, their elders, the past, the present, the future, and their children and families particularly, to all of the many, many extreme, traumatic and profound adversities they have experienced. Now to move on, I'm going to talk today in 3 sections. And I'm talking not so much directly of the research that I'm currently involved with, although it touches on some of that, but more about what I see as the greatest challenges in terms of the public health issues about trauma, loss and grief. And we've already heard some fabulous research. We heard George's this morning about loss. We have experts here. We have my dear colleague from many years back, Professor Lars Schweitzer, from the University of Oslo, and he's another grandparent in this field as well, because of his early work in the field of trauma and disaster. But it's critical that we all recognise that there are major public health issues facing us about this field. The first section I'm going to talk about, and I'd just like, before I do, to acknowledge the many people who've helped, including many of others not mentioned, like Elspeth McDonald with the Trauma Loss and Grief Network, and many of the people who were at the workshop yesterday. But all of you have contributed to some of the knowledge that's here. Now, we talk a lot about adversities. The unit that I have at Western Sydney is actually called the Science of Mental Health Adversities, and it still has that name to a degree. Resilience and pathologies, we've seen, are a floating spectrum of understandings depending on what theoretical posture we bring to it, what theoretical understanding, and also what's in our own hearts and minds. We talk about trauma and loss. Fortunately, there's a growing recognition of the distinct phenomenology of these two potential stress or reactions, but that is still in a melting point. The uncertainty, the fear, and the yearning for safe and secure worlds, what we know, what is familiar, and yet the challenge of having to go forward into the future about what is unfamiliar and what is different, and the excitement of that as well. The pain, and for children, how that's expressed. The internalising and externalising phenomena that is so common in childhood and mightn't fit within any DSM, ICD or any other categorisation. And ultimately the child's world of experience. I'm going to talk about trauma and loss, and this, I apologise for the detail, but it's really just trying to highlight the fact that trauma and loss are interactive, that with a trauma you might lose things, just as in 9/11, the United States lost its sense of national and personal invulnerability There are many losses as well as many experiences that might be perceived as traumatic by people. You have life threat, the cognitive processes that deal with the reality of death, which is particularly significant in terms of children's understanding because of the level of cognitive development and encompassing of what death really means in terms of finality, the fear and threat and the anxiety that might be associated, the separation anxiety with loss, the fight, flight, freeze, and the searching and finding these behaviours and the physiological and neuronal things which have been spoken about already and will be further at this meeting are all part of the mix. It is little wonder that we seek for our own feelings of certainty to make clear packages around this, which may not be as clear as we hope or wish. And so when we look at the future, I've chosen to speak about resilience as a phenomenon, a complex and spontaneous phenomenon for most, and courage, which is a critical part of how people go forward in the face of threat. And little talked about and recognised, although there's a very interesting personal history book that's been written about it and some great research. And how people orient to action and to focus on survival. And that might be part of what resilience is ultimately about, how we survive. Because survival is the core issue in resilience. And the surviving well is the additional issue, the strengths, the problem solving, and some of the things that have been looked at, the risk taking, but I always hope we remember the affective component, the hope, the optimism, the altruism, the determination, the efficacy, and the person who affects that. And ultimately endurance, flexibility, and adaptations. Flexibility is a key human phenomenon, and it's how we survive. And when we look at some of the resources we develop, it's ultimately critical that we build in an understanding that they will be used by humans in a human context and human place in flexible ways. I've called the first section of my talk about dark trauma. It often happens in the dark, and I'm talking about the abuse of children. The silence, the shame, the secret, the intrusive aggression that is part of this. The trauma, the threat, the helplessness, the loss of self, the loss of safety, the loss of trust. Immersion in a situation where trust is gone, helplessness and sometimes hopelessness. And the whole culture that still exists, sadly, of don't ask, don't tell, don't know. And how, despite this, children survive with resilience. And there's a spectrum of adversities, and there's a huge explosion of literature in mental health and other fields in the last 6 to 9 months, highlighting the impact of adversities in childhood and mental health, some of it from the best epidemiologists in the world. And I would like to talk a little to this in the first part of this talk. These adversities have looked at multiplicity and different measures, but the milieu of the family, retrospective, prospective, and those have different meanings, whether they're independent of the child or not, how much they've been validated in legal processes, perhaps child abuse by physical examination. There's a great deal of literature highlighting the clustering of these multiple adversities, particularly clustering around severe child abuse, child sexual abuse, child physical abuse, and neglect. Adversities are common in family life, as I'll go on to show. And there's the adversities which come from the broader environmental milieu, the external, the accidents, the disasters, the disease, acts of God or man, and the trauma, loss, dislocation and disruption that are associated with these. And children's reactions, as most of you will know, vary along emotional, cognitive, behavioural, physiological, a whole range of things which will be profoundly influenced by development, age, timing, and of course the environmental context of the family. It might overwhelm children's capacity for emotional regulation, the understanding of the meaning. We know that the finality of death, for example, even despite the children's exposure to multiple informations about this, may still be very uncertain for the younger child. Death, threat, loss and uncertainty. The behavioural issues, internalising the regression, externalising and acting out, and the signals of body pain, personal pain, need and others, and what's been called, originally perhaps by Scott Henderson, the care eliciting behaviours, the spontaneous part of childhood and adult life, the reaching out, the vibes we give off when we need comforting, and the silent dark places where some of this happens, the child's soul is affected. In family studies, the very interesting papers in the Archives of General Psychiatry this year looking at retrospective examination but consistent findings out of the National Comorbidity Study with Kessler's group. And the onset of all groups of mental disorders correlates, and they don't sound positive, very strongly. Onset, not just persistence, correlates with the experience of abuse and multiple adversities in childhood. And they attest to it in very strong studies that has 44.6% of childhood onset mental health problems and 25.9 to 32% of adult onset correlates strongly with the experience of childhood adversities. So when we talk about early intervention, when we talk about prevention, unless we address these correlates, unless we address this vulnerability, we are floating in a sea of troubles. And the World Mental Health Survey has repeated this. This is not one. These are multiple, consistent. Every time I looked to find the refuting ones, I found more that agreed with these consistent findings. Who will, if we don't stop it? We know there's a lot more investment, and I'll talk about that in this. Prospective, I went and looked for Michael Rutter, who'd done the child epidemiology, and found that he's done a follow-up study asking a question later on, but linking it with prospective data taken in adolescence and in midlife, and found these sorts of odd ratios associated with childhood adversities. The UK birth cohort, another longitudinal study, asking about sexual abuse with prospective data that was accumulated separate from this, again found this and highlighted the multiplicity of adversities and the strong correlation. The issue about major depression, recurrence, chronic and suicidal behaviour is critical and comes up in multiple other studies that I'll touch on. Another study looked at adults with a child protection history validated and found again increased risk of in 12 months and lifetime mental health problems, PTSD, mood and anxiety disorders, all with heightened odds ratio and substance use, all disorder groups and particularly 3 or more disorders in there, so the comorbidity. High levels of association for something that we don't actively address in mental health or prevention strategies to the necessary degree, if at all. Maladaptive family function is a phrase coined out of the World Mental Health Survey grouping, which looked at the correlations of these adversities and their clustering around abuse and neglect, particularly abuse of intrusive violence and sexual abuse, primitive sexual abuse, parental mental illness and substance abuse, so you can pick up the maybe genetic as well as the mental illness thread, the family violence and conflict, the criminality, all the disorders in childhood. It's associated with the onset in childhood, adolescent and adult life. Other losses and things less contribution, more associated just with childhood. 3 or more adversities give increased risk, and many of the studies show the subactive nature of these, that it's to a certain plateau, they kept adding, but then the additional impact slowed down. Stress sensitisation, another body of work done to show that if you had a child adversity in the past year at a life stress, you're at much greater risk of major depressive, PTSD, anxiety, perceived stress, 3 or more, greatly increased versus no child adversities. These cumulative adversity findings keep repeating themselves and really highlight how critical the sort of social as well as psychological and other interventions are in these early years. Severity is not just numbers, it's more clearly associated with poorer mental health. This is a Mexican study replicating some of the World Mental Health Survey data and showing it predicted, adversities in childhood predicted onset of psychopathology in child, adolescent and adult life. Family dysfunction, strongly predicted. It's all so important to remember that sometimes the impact of child adversity can appear primarily or be detected primarily even in old age, or return if it's been partly subservient to the person's adaptation. This is the dark trauma, the hidden trauma, the not spoken about trauma. Let's talk about suicide risk. Got large strategies for suicide prevention, but not many focus on the issue associated with child sexual abuse and suicide attempts. and coronial data linkages in Australia, as well as the finding of increased suicidal planning and attempts and increase being associated with sexual abuse, made very strong links between coronial data, fatal overdose, and linkage to data sets on child sexual abuse. Physical health. You know, we've got great public health strategies now on obesity and exercise and smoking, and yet many of the pathways may be through the impact of these experiences on the emptiness inside the child, the neediness and physiological problems. Much of this I fully acknowledge may need to be further dissected, but one of the most challenging things is the repeated and different studies which show similar trends, which is one of the strongest things that makes you realise we must take notice. Needless to say, Michael Raphael and his group also looked at resilience, and they certainly found, as we would find and as other studies have highlighted, that a great many people don't seem to have it, if we define resilience by the lack of having a problem, as many people are indeed resilient in that sort of context. And it might be predicted by being, if you're an adult, being resilient, better adolescent mental health. Identifying one parent as very caring or feeling that one parent loved you. Positive relationships with peers or adult friendships and the stability of adult love relationships. And all of us who've ever worked clinically will remember the patients we've seen who've had these tragic life histories and difficulties, but these variables are very common in the clinical context. We also looked at the Cowie-Hives birth code, and this I don't have authorised for because the report didn't identify them, but the same things have come up from work like Anne Maston's Ordinary Magic and Norm Gomesi's work about the resilience of children in environments of profound adversity, which didn't necessarily focus on the abuse, but the profound social adversity and neglect, and highlighted how much the issue of temperament, disposition, intelligence, some of the resources children might bring to them, affectional bonds in family and believing that someone out there might love you, external support system, and school and others. Much of this we know, but don't act on it. And my reason for repeating it is that, and it's interesting that Patricia Mrazek and her husband, she particularly led the prevention work in the US, report from the Institute of Medicine on Prevention and Mental Health, wrote this long before that report, highlighting some of the findings in how children who are abused make adaptations which are part of their resilience or attempts to heal. And she quoted of interest in this narrative of resilience, and I keep coming back to this thread of narratives because some of the work we do, whether or not it's in a structure, the CBT model, or in other forms of healing, or other forms of therapy, is often about the capacity to bring your narrative resilience in play or other ways to the surface. And she quoted the Australian novel A Fortunate Life as one exemplar of this. But the spirit of survival and testimony is as critical as many of you will have seen in the work that you've done. Family functioning. Sarah Ollison and colleagues at the Australian National University did a very interesting examination of the household and income labour set data and Australia elder data, looking at that versus. It didn't look at child sexual abuse because it was not looked at. And how frequent in Australian populations adversities are in children's lives, and they tended to cluster in 20% or so. Poverty, single parenthood is found in the National Survey of Mental Health and Wellbeing Child and Adolescent in 2000 and in that rather late 1990s 2000, clustered very strongly with poorer child and adolescent mental health. Sadly, despite the fact there's been an adult survey repeated, not identified resources to repeat the Australian child and adolescent survey, but we'll be pursuing that. A very good report through the National Clearinghouse for Child Abuse and Neglect by Price Robinson drew together a lot of Australian studies about estimates of the prevalence in Australia. Physical abuse, 5 to 10%. And this is on research studies on people, some of you may be in this room, but certainly strong and good research studies. Neglect, much harder to emotional maltreatment, 11%, witnessing family violence, to 23%, and non-penetrative abuse. And these figures are staggering when you look at them. This is a huge proportion of children, between 4 and 8% having penetrative sexual abuse, which is rape, and 7 to 12% of females. Clustering again with family function universities, but chilling in that we haven't stopped it. There's some suggestion maybe the rates are lower, but because the states and territories report differently, it's very hard to make those judgments. Multiple studies here, and Rosamund Rogers is one of the most interesting ones in the PATH project in Canberra. Again, chiefly retrospective, but interesting in that they find that a significant number of people have some adversity, and severe adversity such as physical and sexual abuse and neglect are common and frequent and clustered. They've also asked about happiness and normality. And they found that if as an adult you rated your childhood as not happy, it was much more likely to correlate with the sorts of things that are clustered around child abuse and neglect. If you report your child which is not normal, is similarly the case. Not happy and not normal was bad outlook. Substance abuse, conflict, all the same sorts of things. Women had more adversities. And so what have we done? What's been done? A lot of the things that are developed in improving our own network at ANU are distance resources, and they're an important basis because they contribute lots of information and knowledge. This data is not yet loaded up onto our network, but it will be in due course. National networks, National Association for Prevention of Child Abuse, the Australian Institute of Family Studies, the National Child Protection Clearinghouse, care systems in different states and territories with protection and counselling, child and adolescent mental health, mentor programs. Each state's got little bits of things where it's nipping away trying to bring these things together to do better. Having chaired the National Prevention Initiative for a decade and recently reviewed the health and hospital reform documents, prevention for child and adolescent mental health virtually doesn't occur or is mentioned in words that are passing. There is no initiative for that. Smoking, drinking, and all of the things that are practical and clear that people can see and you can have a righteous belief about, but very little that touches on what's needed here, and an unwillingness in the face of the high demand for adult services to engage such issues. We've got some interesting work, and I know Kevin Ronan's here, and he and his colleagues have done, as have other workers, trying to look at what sort of way you would manage people who have experienced profound abuse and neglect, and what you would do. And this work, which has been very detailed, and I think I'm fair in saying in what I've read, not as yet a randomised control trial, has shown decreased and increased coping. What it highlights for me is the subtlety and flexibility that needs to come into managing this. This is no circumstance to make the child confront what happened, because when the child's been profoundly abused, their world is one filled with trauma. They're immersed, and I think that concept of immersion, which goes back to the work of Robert J. Lifton after Hiroshima, how you're immersed in the ongoing implications and profoundness of trauma and loss, is critical in how difficult it is often to both set a way of managing and how you can help people move from the immersion field. Burdens and consequences, a good review has really highlighted some of those issues. The Productivity Commission in Australia has shown a report that it costs Australia, at the time of this, which was 2007 data, nearly $4 billion annually. And that doesn't include everything that I've mentioned at all. A national framework's been developed by COAD for 2009 to 20. Protecting children is everyone's business, early intervention, prevention, better support, but I've not yet seen the funds allocation and a system to make this work. And having tried to have sign-up to systems, every state's got some good things that are happening, but getting a national process forward has been, to date, an extremely difficult thing to tackle these sorts of complex and socially sensitive problem areas. Prevention, we have the nurse thing from the old thing, replicated everywhere and effective in making things better along the lifespan. We've got the excellent work from the Triple P and the Incredible Years programs, but particularly Triple P, which has been done at population levels and integrated into systems and can make a difference over 2 years and longer. Developed by Matt Sanders at the University of Queensland and extended into many other countries, but not across Australia. We don't herald heroes in our own country very well. Resilience, the Kids Matter initiatives through schools, and the APS is going to be a helpful thing in building resilience, and there's been some excellent programs addressing this, including ones developed here in Queensland and the programs looking at prevention in school settings. But nothing consistent has happened to really tackle this, and the dark secrets, the dark trauma still stays hidden because it's very difficult to move into and address that area. Child continuities can make a difference, parental support, the Cockney initiatives, which are progressing very widely. All of those things can help, but it's still the untouchable and the secret. There's many complex and interesting studies which I'm not going into, and for the moment class myself as an expert in, but we note that even ageing can be accelerated by child abuse. And the protective effects of affection, stimulation and oxytocin are being explored. Indigenous children know more than any others, and very much highlighted by the Western Australian Aboriginal Child Health Survey, child and social and emotional wellbeing, parent taken away, and all of the abuse and clustering of family adversities. Increased risk of all disorders. And if you've had more of these adversities, it's all around 2 or 3 adversities things seem to tip. If we talk of a tipping point concept out of the popular psychological literature and resilience, this fits with work that's been going on for a long time about the clustering and multiplicity of adversities in this context. No illnesses, no stresses, and care and no violence are protective. Child sexual abuse was looked at by Lila Curry in 2000 for the Australian Government by a report commissioned by Senator Bill Heffernan, and yet nothing was done following the findings of that. Nothing that changed. And then we have, as we go on now, despite the enormous resilience and courage that Aboriginal people have shown, we know that many worries still affect them. The longitudinal study of Indigenous children, footprints in time, shows how much big worry, stress and sadness, the death of a family member. And when Pat and I went around the country, I went to more funerals in 6 weeks than I've been to in the whole of the rest of my life. Violent deaths, motor vehicle accidents, fights. Most parents rate things positively. They're full of optimism and hope, affection, despite the despair. The demonstrability of this is profound. And the many interesting healing programs, some of which I've been involved with, which focus on encompassing the cultural, spiritual base of understanding, experience, and in using strength to go forward. And Lorraine Peters and Rosemary Wanganeen have really done some very interesting work. But I come to the last point on this slide, the intervention. Do we have any knowledge, apart from disruption of the systems that were protected for Aboriginal people, what has been achieved? We know the possible health gains, and this highlights a great many of the problems that we face as a nation, the failure to address what we might do. A good summary highlight the importance of safety first and the culture of family and what removal of the child may mean, and the problems that arise for many of you might know in the context of being in foster homes or other settings. The things that we could do that might make it better, and the traumatisation that's occurred for children in care. Prevention of future harm and health promotion are critical issues in this, and the particular issues that arise for families who come to this country, as we all did one or another as boat people, and yet have additional tragedies on top of the trauma that they may have experienced in the transition process, superimposed by their transition into this country with further trauma. And the whole issue of abuse and problems in childhood being a matter of shame. And the issues of gender, which have not been much touched on but are critical in this context. The devaluing of female children may be part of why they become property in such circumstances across many cultures, including Western. Now I'm going to talk very briefly on trauma and loss of circumstance. I've used this phrase because I'm respectful of the vast body of work that's been done about this, and I'm not going to talk in detail. It's about accidents, assaults, the excellent work that Justin Canardi's been doing here. Many of you have been doing great work in these fields. Familiar natural disasters that people have been used to, the floods, the cyclones, and the work that's done gently in various ways and often through non-government agencies supporting families when they've lost a parent. I know it's legacy day to day, and the great work that's been done in many circumstances in the past supporting military families. Recognition and response is much more frequent here. Sadly, there's sometimes an invasion of the trauma counsellors, and we've seen some good sides of that elsewhere. But there are care systems, there's response systems and capacity to act in these circumstances. There's good models, good care and growing evidence, focal therapies, and the work Brett's done in disasters is a very important part of that. But anyone I haven't mentioned, it's no intention to leave out multiple excellent pieces of work that have been done. Inherent in much of this is our capacity to tell our story in our way and in with some control. One of the worst things about an intrusive trauma therapy is that it intrudes on a circumstance where there was no control, where you couldn't control and keep it out and stop the trauma. And yet when you have a therapy which takes over control, that's not a good thing. The therapy model which gives control and gives choice and gives time is a critical part of how people choose their own pathways of resilience and adaptation. And as we know from the excellent work presented this morning by George, and as many others know in the surveys that have been following disasters, it's still profound. I'd like to draw this talk to its close and some questions about the other major process that we now face, which I've chosen to call mass catastrophe. And this relates very much to the mass natural disasters, but also encompasses the threats of terrorism, which are more subtle, sometimes not quite so lethal, but pervasive, and war and insurgency, which we're all engaged, sadly, in one way or another. One of the things that struck me, while the first one was in the dark, this is in the light, at least in the beginning. There's the glare, the media, non-stop coverage. Some of that, as we know, potentially traumatising for children. The convergence of assistance, focus on survival and aid. We know from many of the bits of work we've done in descriptive terms that sometimes that aid convergence is overwhelming. And this comes to the forced therapies, the forced counselling, which may not fit with either the culture, beliefs or needs of people at that time. Children die, and they're much more fragile in these circumstances. They die in greater numbers. We know that when children die, that has enormous meaning to children themselves, other children. It's to do with that concept of loss of innocence, knowing that children can die. And I feel particularly in this context for the children who were exposed in the Victorian bushfires, because 23 children died in those fires. And that has enormous impact on other children. The knowledge that you can die in this way, and the fantasies about how their friends or others died, is a critical issue that stays with them as an additional component of the adversity that they deal with in the aftermath. One of the things, though, is while we get all of this and the flooding of resources, sometimes wanted, sometimes unwanted, like the second-hand underwear that often flows in the relief when people are making donations after, as well as the excellent support we get through organisations where funds come in, like the Red Cross, as well as the practical assistance and outreach. All of those things are highlighted particularly in the immediate period. But it's in the aftermath where we have immersion in the loss, the dislocation, displacement, the ongoing trauma, and the disruptions of the rituals and nature of everyday life. And it may well be that many people here have a sense of abandonment, and that's certainly what they talk about in the aftermath of mass adversities and disasters. That they know people care about nobody's taking any notice. It isn't like people want to be on the front page, but it's the fact that it means someone has to know about what they experienced. There's no display in the prolonged aftermath, an occasional story. Abandonment is the common thing. There is still courage and resilience and endurance, and I pay particular tribute to the endurance theme in resilience, which is poorly researched but is profound. And this is Haiti, but it could be Pakistan. If we look at the nature and extent of the mass natural disasters that have been experienced in the last decade, less than a decade. Then it's beyond belief, even though we've had big disasters here and the profound ones like Cyclone Larry with fewer deaths, with the bushfires with 173 deaths and the profound devastation of communities. Some way in our safe worlds we can't always fully realise just how profound and disruptive. Williams made a good summary of some of the impact of violence and terrorism. They're more vulnerable to the chaos and disruptions, to the total war. When many countries face insurgency, as we see in Afghanistan, we see in Iraq, and in fact in many countries in Africa, the total war insurgencies affect civilians. The concept of total war is used in some of this literature because it's really saying this isn't just the soldiers fighting against one another for a named conflict. It's the people who are most vulnerable in such contexts are those who are in fact the civilians living in the community, and women and children are profoundly more likely to be affected directly in this type of instance. There are multiple stressors, dislocation, disruptions. There are direct victims of war and indirect victims of the terrorism and the fear and uncertainty, the no knowledge of your familiarity of everyday life. While resilience and adaptation occurs, and people talk about it in intelligence and temperament and family relationships, this is a big picture thing, and we can't rely just on individuals without what every individual has inside them. Their guts to go forward, their hope is part of it. Child soldiers are one profound and terrible example of the destruction and death of childhood has been claimed. Women in refugee camps, there's been a loss of safety, loved ones, home, community, added adversities, sexual assault in many of the camps in place, and then the lack of safety in a new home, the stresses of getting accepted, the cultural change, the status, and the multiple prolonged adversities across generations, which may be translated both psychologically, socially, culturally. Children's vulnerability and mental health exists, but there's still courage, endurance, challenge, and hope. Mass adversities occur as above in Cyclone Larry in our own country, China earthquake. It's impossible to contemplate that. Brisbane, Sydney, we can't imagine it. We can't even fantasise really. Strengthening family communities, some interesting work by Froma Walsh has highlighted the sustaining approach to building resilience, and it fits not to a significant degree with some of the things that Fran Norris and her colleagues have spoken about in societal resilience. Acknowledgement of the reality, validation of people's experience, shared experience of loss and survivorship, being a shared narrative, reorganisation, reinvestment in life, relationships, hope. And it may be involved belief systems, organisational issues which have not been adequately addressed, and communication, problem solving, many of the traditional things we see. We see a range of stressors, major disasters. We would continue to look at these sorts of things. Spontaneous resilience, however, I would say is a very important thing for us to recognise. We try to name it and to label it. People often say to me, why have you stayed working in a field like this, which I've worked in since the time of Cyclone Tracy? And it's to do with, as many of my colleagues will know, that you don't just see the tragedy and the horror, you see the best of humanity as well, and what people do with their courage, their strength in going forwards. They take risks, but they fight to stay resilient. They give memorial, they have hope that they will find and know their loved ones again, but they go forward. Child impacts are horrific with mass adversities. Hurricane Katrina, there have been school-based programs, resilience building aftermath coming out of Israel. And all of these huge incidents require many things, the embezzle and hostage taking. Our own experiences have highlighted, as Brett reported in some of his work. There's narratives, there's books, there's stories, and there's the institutions coming to offer support, as our program with schools in Victoria and Vicky, Ruth and Michelle were involved with. This is artwork following the bushfires. Creativity is one form of expression. Protecting children in disasters and mass adversities, Chi from the Asia Australia Mental Health Link in Melbourne has developed a resource which was available for circulation in China before the Sichuan earthquake. Mental health impacts are profound. Long-term effects are profound. It's resilience, but without systems function again, people stay, as it were, immersed in what's happened. Practical resources are critical because people need the capacity to have shelter. It isn't that they replace the need for succour and support. Longer-term issues remain, and the special vulnerabilities of children need to be taken into account throughout the prolonged period of aftermath of mass adversities. And the numbers are huge. They're beyond our encompassing. They're beyond one-to-one therapies. It's how we build systems which can respond and protect children and then provide through their institutions and organisations care and support and help. I'd like to conclude by coming back to an old diagram which goes back to Raphael 1986, adapted no doubt from many other people, and new forms in our textbook disaster psychiatry with Sana et al. It can become a second disaster. People can stay immersed in the horror of the aftermath. And in my trips to Victoria, I felt that particularly when we drive through the blackened forests that are still there, that are still challenging. Mass catastrophe can be both acute and prolonged. Children are the most vulnerable. They have many experiences. Family is central, schools and continuities and protective strategies. But immersion can occur, both in the child adversities I've talked about, in the profound disruptions of family life, and the profound and ongoing trauma to which they're subjected in abuse. And the need to give testimony, the need to pay tribute, but their courage and actions for survival, for life, for love in the future, is what takes them forward and hopefully takes us on in this work. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of minutes, so perhaps just a few questions before we hand over to the panel.
It's really bad if no one asks any questions.
Perhaps stand up if that's okay.
Okay.
Hi, Chris.
Beverly. Would you like to comment on the two different approaches to mental health, the ALP and the coalition?
I don't think there's any approach to mental health that's adequate currently. And I'm strongly advocating, as will my various colleagues, that there is a need to encompass a lifespan, population-based approach which takes into account the earliest needs from someone said yesterday, from just before conception, but certainly from pregnancy through. Women get physically abused and assaulted during pregnancy, as the studies at the Royal Brisbane Hospital showed decades ago. And men get beaten up and raped in jail. There are many things along the way, but certainly the critical issues that we have a whole of lifespan approach, and that it deals with the population issues and as well as the clinical services. Those two things go hand in hand, and we have to deal with it at both levels. It isn't just one or the other. We have to have good caring clinicians who look for people's needs and respond, who understand their social context, and who also assess and value and help them recognise and utilise their strengths and resilience inherent in that. We need population strategies which give mental health an agenda which is not of victims, but is of the strengths and how it's everybody's right to good mental health to go forward. But we need to start early if we're going to guarantee that right as a fulfilment. And this is the first time I've said that publicly, and it won't be the last. Nobody really wants to do prevention because our training institutions don't provide for it adequately. And I tried to engage with the public health people over repeated times in the past 2 decades to engage the broader public health agenda in mental health and prevention. And it's so much easier to say how bad we are to smoke and drink to excess and to get fat and not exercise. And speaking as someone who gets fat regularly, I think we need more than righteousness. We need a true understanding and a real capacity to address these issues. And why I decided to talk on this topic was I was so shocked to recognise that again and again so many of these things seem to be beyond our understanding, and I don't mean us as individuals here because we are focused on the good as a society, and to really actively address them. Now, what I want to think I said today, because I'm so old, this might be the last time I get a chance to talk, because 4 weeks from tomorrow I turn 76. But I'd like to just say that I think this organisation is going well. Look after the young. I sit on many committees and they say, oh, we've got to look after the elderly. The elderly do need assistance and recognition, but the young need it far more. And we don't have enough advocacy about this. We have good paediatricians and good community workers, good NGOs fighting, but we all have to do this together because there's inadequate investment in the children's needs for the future. Thank you.
On behalf of the organising committee, just a small token of our appreciation for the keynote. Thank you. And please thank Professor Raphael. And I'll hand over to this point to Mark Kramer to